Today, I will tell you a story of love, loss, and betrayal that began on the day I buried my husband. We were gathered in Hartford's old stone church, a place where Henry and I had sat together countless Sundays before. The high ceilings arched above us, the stained glass caught the pale winter sun, and the air smelled faintly of candle wax and polished wood. It should have been a place of peace, yet it felt like the walls themselves were closing in, preparing to witness what was about to unfold. I clutched the scarf Henry had given me on our 25th anniversary, the gray wool scratchy but comforting against my cheek. That scarf had always been too warm for me, but today I wore it not for warmth, but because it still carried the faintest trace of his cologne. It was the closest thing I had to his hand on my shoulder. My heart pounded with each word of prayer, and though I bowed my head, I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on me. When the service ended, our family lawyer, Robert Hayes, stepped forward. His hair was silver now, his glasses sliding low on his nose, but his voice carried the authority of decades. The hush in the pews grew heavy as he unfolded Henry's will. The sound of the paper crackling seemed louder than the organ that had played moments earlier. I, Henry Cole, Robert began, being of sound mind, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, valued at $55 million in long-term stocks and investments, to my wife, Margaret Cole. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint creak of wood as people shifted in their seats, the rustle of clothing as heads turned. The numbers themselves, 55 million, seemed to echo against the stone walls, heavy and unreal. To me, they were not numbers, but years of Henry's steady patience, the way he had refused to gamble when others rushed, the way he saved instead of spent. Every dollar represented nights he had stayed late at his desk, every stock a small piece of his belief that slow and steady was better than bold and reckless. I sat frozen, my breath shallow. This was not news to me. Henry had told me many times that he wanted me to hold everything. Still, hearing it spoken aloud in front of family and neighbors made the weight of it feel crushing. I felt eyes on me from every side, some wide with surprise, others narrowed with speculation, but none pierced like the eyes of my son. Daniel sat stiffly in the front row, his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might break. He didn't blink. He didn't look down in grief or up in remembrance. He looked only at me, and in that gaze was not sorrow, but accusation. Beside him, Vanessa, his wife, crossed her legs and folded her manicured hands over her lap. Her face was a mask of polite restraint, but at the corners of her lips I saw it, a faint smile, sharp as glass. It was not the smile of a daughter-in-law mourning her father, but of a woman who had expected this moment and was already calculating the next step. In that instant, I remembered Daniel as a boy, the way he used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms rattled the windows, how he once told me I was his anchor, that nothing bad could happen as long as I held him. That little boy was nowhere in sight. What sat before me was a man whose hunger had consumed him, whose ambition glinted sharper than grief. As Robert continued reading through the smaller details of the will, I barely heard him. My ears rang with the sound of Henry's name, my name, and Daniel's silence. Neighbors shifted behind me. I caught whispers about numbers, about fairness, about what this meant. I kept my eyes on the scarf in my lap, twisting the wool between my fingers, praying it might tether me to something steady. When the will was fully read, the congregation began to rise, their footsteps shuffling softly against the old stone floor. Some came to me with hands on my shoulder, offering condolences in hushed voices. "Henry was a good man," they said. "You were lucky to have him." I nodded, but their words slid off me like water against glass. Daniel did not come forward at first. He waited until the others had cleared, until only a handful of people lingered in the aisles. Then he walked toward me, each step deliberate, his polished shoes striking hard against the floor. When he stopped in front of me, the church seemed to grow colder. "Mother," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut, "you don't understand money. This isn't your place." Those were the first words he spoke to me after we laid his father to rest. Not comfort, not grief, not even a moment of silence shared between us. Only that. His tone was not pleading, but commanding, as if he were already the master of what he had not been given. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw not my son, but a stranger. The face was familiar, the eyes were his, but the warmth I once knew had been replaced by steel. Vanessa stood just behind him, her lips pressed in satisfaction, as though the exchange had been rehearsed. I did not answer him then. There was nothing I could say in the hollow of that church that would not fracture us further. I turned away, the scarf pulled tight around my neck, and felt the chill of realization settle deep in my bones. This funeral was not the end of my sorrow. It was the beginning of a storm. A storm I had not chosen, but one I would be forced to face. The day after the funeral, I received Daniel's invitation. He said he wanted to share a quiet dinner, just the three of us, so that we could talk about the future. His tone on the phone was practiced, calm, almost gentle, but beneath it, I heard something sharp. I agreed, not out of trust, but because I needed to look into his eyes and know what kind of battle lay ahead. That evening I stepped into his house, a glass and steel structure in the center of Hartford. The rooms were spotless, too spotless. Every surface gleamed as though scrubbed free of any trace of real life. The smell of lemon polish filled the air, cold and sterile. This was not a home, it was a showroom. The dining table stretched long, heavy walnut, shining under white LED lights that burned too bright. Daniel was already seated at the head of the table, a folder waiting before him. Vanessa hovered nearby, her heels clicking against the tile as she carried 2 glasses of wine. She placed one in front of me, her smile thin, the kind that spoke of rehearsed civility. I declined the glass, folding my hands in my lap. Daniel pushed the folder toward me. His movements were slow, deliberate. The title printed in bold letters across the first page read, "Transfer of Assets." He leaned forward, his voice steady but cold. "Sign this, Mother. I'll handle everything. You'll be taken care of." I looked down at the papers. Every line had been prepared, every signature space already marked with my name. My pulse quickened, but my voice remained even. "What happens if I refuse?" Vanessa answered, before Daniel could speak. Her tone was sharp, dripping with contempt, disguised as concern. "You risk everything. Investments require skill. You're not trained. Daniel has the education. The market can destroy someone like you in days." She placed her hand on Daniel's arm, as though to steady him, but her eyes glittered with expectation. Daniel's lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mother, don't make this harder than it has to be. You don't understand money. I do. You sign, and everything stays simple. You don't, and you'll regret it." I picked up the pen, felt its weight press into my fingers. For a brief moment I imagined giving in. The exhaustion of the past week, the grief of Henry's passing, the suffocating glare of my son and his wife pressing down on me, surrender would have been easy. But then I remembered Henry's words: patience, discipline, principle. He had built his fortune brick by brick, and he had trusted me, not because I was skilled in finance, but because he knew I understood its meaning. Money was never just numbers. It was integrity made visible. I placed the pen back down. My hand pushed the folder across the table, sliding it firmly back to Daniel. My voice cut the air like a blade. "No." Silence fell, heavier than the storm beginning to rumble outside. Daniel's smile evaporated, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. Vanessa's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. The tension in the room was a living thing, pressing against my chest. Daniel rose slowly from his chair. His height cast a shadow across the table. "Do you realize what you're doing?" His words were low, but the fury behind them shook the space between us. I met his stare without flinching. "I realize exactly what I'm doing. I'm keeping my dignity." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vanessa exhaled sharply, setting her glass down with a thud. "You're being reckless. You think this money will protect you, but you'll end up alone and helpless. And when that happens, don't expect us to pick up the pieces. I stood, tightening the scarf around my shoulders. If that's the price of standing on my own 2 feet, I'll pay it. I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of papers shuffling, Daniel slamming the folder shut. His voice followed me to the door, bitter and sharp. "You'll regret this." The sky had already opened when I drove back toward my house. Rain slashed against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep pace. The storm outside matched the one inside me. Anger, grief, and something harder than both. A determination I had not felt in years. At last, I turned into my driveway. The electronic gate loomed ahead, its steel bars wet with rain. I rolled down my window and reached for the keypad. My fingers tapped the code I had entered thousands of times. The green light should have flashed. The gate should have opened with its familiar hum. Instead, a red glow lit the darkness. Access denied. I froze. The rain hammered my shoulders as I tried again, punching the code harder. Access denied. My breath came fast, my hands shaking. I wiped water from my eyes and tried once more, holding the numbers longer, slower. Access denied. The realization hit me like a blade to the chest. My own gate, my own home had turned me away. The account, the system, the code. Someone had changed it. Someone had made sure I no longer had access. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, the rain pouring through the open window, soaking my coat, my scarf, even the seat beneath me. My voice cracked as I whispered into the storm. Even my house betrayed me. For a long moment I sat there, drenched and trembling, every beat of my heart echoing the storm above. But beneath the shock, a deeper current stirred. They thought they had broken me. They thought cutting me out of my own home would end the fight. They were wrong, because betrayal does not end a story. Betrayal begins one. The morning after the storm, I woke inside the small motel I had chosen for the night. My clothes were still damp, my body stiff, but my mind sharp. I knew Daniel and Vanessa would not stop with locking me out. They would strike at something far more fragile, my reputation. And by the time I stepped out onto Hartford's narrow main street, I saw how quickly venom could spread. 2 women stood by the bakery, their voices hushed, but their eyes darting toward me. "She forgot the gas on again," one whispered. "Nearly burned her kitchen last month." The other nodded, her lips pursed. "And bills. I heard she hasn't paid her property taxes in 6 months. Poor thing, losing her mind like that." I kept walking, my scarf pulled tight, but the sting hit deeper than the rain had. Lies travel faster than truth. With each step, I heard new fragments. Confused. Fragile. Not safe alone. Words sharp enough to carve at my dignity. By the afternoon, I received a call from my old neighbor, Mrs. Turner. Her tone was hesitant. "Margaret, I hate to say this, but people are talking. They say you left the stove running, that you've been forgetting things. I told them it wasn't true, but, well, Vanessa said she was worried for you." Vanessa? Of course. The smile at the funeral had been more than satisfaction. It had been the opening of her campaign. She was not content to take my home. She would make the community believe I was unfit to live alone, unfit to hold Henry's estate. That evening, Robert Hayes called. His voice was urgent. "Margaret, I received a report. A licensed psychiatrist has submitted a statement claiming you show signs of short-term memory decline. Vanessa delivered it herself." My breath caught. "A report? I never saw any doctor." "I know," Robert replied, "but the document looks official. They'll use it to argue for guardianship, to place you under Daniel's control. It's a tactic, and a ruthless one." I sat in silence, the motel lamp buzzing faintly beside me. Henry's scarf lay across my lap. A false report, whispered lies, and a son willing to stand behind them. Rage rose in my chest, not loud, but steady, a fire I could not extinguish. The next day, I passed through the grocery store. Conversations faltered when I entered. A young cashier, no older than 20, avoided my gaze as she rang up my bread and milk. Behind me, 2 men spoke low, but not low enough. "It's sad, really. Her husband trusted her, but look at her now. Lost. I turned, meeting their eyes. Do I look lost? My tone was steady, sharper than I intended. They shifted uncomfortably, muttered excuses, and left, but I knew their words would linger in the air long after they were gone. Meanwhile, in Daniel's sleek living room, Vanessa paced, her heels clicking on the marble. "It's working," she told him. "The neighbors believe it. They see her as fragile. When the time comes, the court won't hesitate. She'll be silent, and we'll be in control." Daniel frowned, restless. "She's stubborn. She won't surrender easily." Vanessa leaned close, her voice low, poisonous. "Then we strip away her credibility. The community will believe us. By the time she realizes, she'll have nothing left but silence." Those words reached me later through a friend who overheard them. Hearing them confirmed what I already knew. This was no misunderstanding, no clash of pride. It was a deliberate attack designed to erase me before I could fight back. I sat alone that night in the cottage I managed to unlock with the spare key Henry had hidden years ago. The lake outside was dark, the water restless under the wind. I lit the old lamp, placed the scarf around my shoulders, and whispered to myself, "They will not silence me." But I also understood the danger. Reputations in small towns are fragile glass. Once cracked, they never look whole again. The whispers were not random. They were weapons, carefully placed. Every false story, every forged line on that psychiatrist's report was part of a plan. I poured tea into one of Henry's old mugs and held it steady in both hands. I thought of his words from long ago. "Patience, Margaret. The market is full of storms, but storms always reveal who built on rock and who built on sand." I would have to weather this storm as I had weathered so many before, not by shouting louder than them, but by standing steady while their lies burned out. The next morning, another neighbor crossed the street to avoid me. A man I had known for 30 years pretended not to hear my greeting. I felt the weight of isolation pressing hard, but I also felt a sharper clarity. If Vanessa believed she could bury me under whispers, she had underestimated the power of truth, because truth does not vanish in silence. Truth waits, and when the right moment comes, it cuts sharper than any rumor. The rain had not stopped since the night the gate denied me. Sheets of water blurred the windshield as I drove north, the wipers fighting to keep up. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, my knuckles pale, my chest filled with a steady resolve that surprised even me. I did not know what waited for me, but I knew where I was going. Henry once told me, half in jest, half in warning, "If the day ever comes when you feel pushed out, Margaret, go to the cottage by Candlewood Lake. That place will always open its arms to you." At the time I had laughed, brushing away the thought, but now his words rang in my ears like prophecy. The drive was long, nearly 2 hours from Hartford, through winding back roads bordered by dark pines that bent under the storm. Towns slipped by, their shops shuttered, their streets empty. Every mile took me further from Daniel's reach, further from Vanessa's whispers, and closer to the one place Henry had promised would remain mine. By the time I turned onto the gravel road that led to the cottage, the rain had softened into a mist. Headlights swept over the outline of cedar beams, the steep roof glistening wet, the lake just beyond shimmering under a break in the clouds. I pulled into the drive, shut off the engine, and sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the sound of water dripping from the trees. When I stepped out, the cold air struck me, sharp but clean. The porch creaked beneath my weight, familiar even after years of neglect. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the brass key Henry had given me decades earlier. My hand trembled as I slid it into the lock. It turned without resistance. The door opened on a rush of cedar and dust. The air smelled of wood and thyme, untouched but not unfriendly. I stepped inside, dripping onto the old floorboards. The cottage looked as though we had only left yesterday. The pine paneling, the stone fireplace, the shelves lined with books whose spines had faded from sun. A quilt still draped over the arm of the couch. I set my bag down and lit the lamp on the side table. Its yellow glow pushed back the shadows, revealing photographs that had gathered a fine coat of dust. On the mantel, A picture of Daniel at 10 years old, grinning with a fishing rod in his hands. On the wall, a framed photo of Henry and me during one of our rare vacations, the ocean behind us, his arms strong around my shoulders. I brushed dust from the frames, my fingertips lingering. The memories cut deep, sharper than the lies spreading through town. But I refused to let grief turn into weakness. Drawn to the desk near the window, I opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath old letters and stationery, lay an envelope thick and sealed. My name was written across the front in Henry's hand. I froze. The ink had bled slightly with age, but the letters were unmistakable. I lifted the envelope carefully, my hands trembling. For a moment, I could not bring myself to break the seal. I simply held it, feeling the weight of Henry's presence in the paper, the knowledge that he had thought ahead, as he always did. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of his careful script. "Margaret," it read, "if the day has come when you feel abandoned, if even Daniel turns from you, do not face it alone. I have trusted Robert, Ellen, and Victor. Robert knows the law. Ellen knows the banks. Victor knows protection. Call on them. They will stand beside you as surely as I would. You are stronger than you know. Do not let anyone make you doubt it." The words blurred through my tears. I pressed the letter to my chest, the scarf around my shoulders soaking up the drops that slipped free. The ache in my heart was sharp, but it was not despair. It was something else. Steel hardening under fire. I sat at the desk, staring out at the lake beyond the window. The storm had passed, leaving the water calm, moonlight spilling silver across its surface. I whispered into the silence, my voice steady. "You thought I was alone, Daniel. You thought you could erase me, Vanessa. But Henry saw you before I did, and he left me the strength to fight." A tear slid down my cheek, hot against the cool night, but I did not break. My shoulders straightened, my hands steadied, and I folded the letter back into its envelope. I slid it into the drawer, not hidden, but waiting. The cottage no longer felt like a relic of the past. It was a fortress, a place to gather, a place to begin again. I stood, letting my eyes trace the old wooden beams, the dusty frames, the familiar walls. This was not where my story ended. This was where it turned. And as the lake rippled quietly beyond the window, I knew one thing with certainty. They had underestimated me. The first blow came not with words, but with numbers. I had driven into town that morning, determined to hold my head high despite the whispers. I pushed my cart slowly down the aisles of the Hartford market, filling it with the ordinary things Henry and I used to buy together. Bread, milk, tea bags, apples. Each item felt like an anchor, something solid in a world that was tilting against me. When I reached the checkout, the young cashier gave me a nervous smile. I slid my debit card across the counter. She swiped it, tapped a few keys, and frowned. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cole. It says declined." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Try again." She did. The same red message flashed on her screen. Declined. Her eyes flicked up, full of pity, the kind of pity that cuts deeper than scorn. Behind me, two people shifted uncomfortably, whispering. Heat rushed to my face. My voice stayed calm. "I'll use the credit card." She nodded quickly. I handed it over, praying this time the machine would beep and approve. Instead, another denial. Declined. The cashier cleared her throat. "Maybe the bank can help you reset?" Her words were soft, but I heard what she didn't say. Maybe she's confused. Maybe she doesn't know her own accounts anymore. The whispers behind me grew louder. Poor thing. First her memory, now her money. I stood frozen, every eye in that line on me, every rumor Vanessa had planted now fed by the glow of a checkout screen. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked tight. Then a voice cut through the haze, steady, warm, familiar. "Margaret, come with me." I turned. Ellen Parker stood at the end of the aisle, her posture tall, her presence commanding. Ellen had been my friend since college. She had also risen to become a senior director at the bank that held Henry's accounts. Her tailored suit was damp from the rain, her eyes sharp with concern. I abandoned the cart without a word and followed her out. The whispers trailed behind me, but Ellen's stride was firm, steady, pulling me back into dignity. Minutes later, we sat in her office at the bank. The blinds were drawn against the storm, the desk neat except for the files she had pulled as soon as we arrived. "Margaret," she said, her voice low, "these accounts are yours. No one, no lawyer, no child, not even Daniel, has authority to freeze them. Unless you signed paperwork, and I know you haven't, this shouldn't be happening." I swallowed hard. Then how? The cards both declined. Ellen opened the folder. "Someone submitted authorization forms last night. Forged signatures. It looks like Daniel's doing. He's trying to create the illusion that you're no longer in control, that you can't even manage your own money." Her words hit like a hammer. "He locked me out of my house," I whispered. "Now he wants to lock me out of myself." Ellen reached across the desk, her hand steady on mine. "Listen to me. You're not alone. I've already reversed the freezes. The accounts are active again. I'll flag every transaction, every attempt he makes. And when this reaches court, and it will, this evidence will tear his claims apart." Relief flooded me, but so did fury. My son had not only betrayed me, he had tried to erase me in the eyes of the community and the law. Ellen's expression hardened. "He's smart, Margaret. He knows reputation and perception can matter as much as truth, but truth leaves a trail, and I'll help you follow it." I nodded, my voice steady now. "Then let him come. Let him try. I won't bow to forged papers and poisoned words." Ellen smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried steel beneath it. That's the Margaret I remember. As I left the bank, the rain had lightened, though the sky was still heavy. I pulled Henry's scarf close around my shoulders. For the first time since the funeral, I felt not just wounded, but armed. They had underestimated me. Ellen was proof I was not as alone as Daniel and Vanessa believed. They thought stripping me of money would strip me of power. Instead, it lit a fire. And fires, once lit, do not die easily. Daniel called that morning with a voice too polite to trust. "Mother, come to dinner tonight. Vanessa and I want to talk calmly, as a family." Calm was the last thing I expected. Still, I agreed. I needed to see what their next move would be. That evening, I walked into their dining room. The table was set for 3, but the atmosphere was tighter than a drawn bowstring. The chandelier cast a sterile glow, bouncing off polished silverware that looked as sharp as weapons. Daniel poured wine, his smile rehearsed. Vanessa adjusted her napkin with calculated grace. We ate in near silence at first, only the clink of cutlery filling the air. Every glance they exchanged was a message I wasn't supposed to hear. My stomach tightened with each bite, though the food had no taste. At last, Vanessa leaned back, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Margaret, let's stop pretending. You know Daniel is the future. He has the education, the experience. If you really love your son, you would hand the reins to him. Let the generation with knowledge and vision lead. All you're doing now is clinging to what is old, what is fading." Her words dripped with contempt, each syllable meant to humiliate. She smiled faintly, as if the logic were undeniable, as if I had no ground to stand on. I set my fork down, folded my hands in my lap, and looked directly at her. My voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Vanessa, love is not measured by how much money you pass down. Love is measured by how much responsibility you entrust. Henry trusted me because he knew I understood the weight of responsibility. That hasn't changed." Daniel's jaw tightened, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her smile faltering. The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. She tried again, her tone sharper. "Responsibility? What responsibility do you think you're holding? These are numbers, investments, deals. You don't belong in that world. We do. You're only standing in the way of progress." I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady. "Progress without principle is just destruction in disguise. You think you deserve this because you studied the language of markets. But you've forgotten the language of integrity. And without that, money is nothing but fuel for greed." For the first time, Vanessa had no quick reply. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her face betrayed the anger she was trying to conceal. Daniel finally spoke, his tone cold and clipped. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Do you really want the whole town to keep whispering about you? Do you want to end up alone with nothing but stubborn pride?" I looked at him, at the boy who once begged me to stay by his bed after nightmares, and I felt a pang of sorrow. But sorrow did not weaken me. My voice was firm. "If standing alone is the price of keeping my dignity, then I will pay it, because dignity, once surrendered, never returns." The silence after those words was unbearable, even for them. Vanessa's hand tightened around her wine glass, her knuckles white. She forced a smile, but her voice shook. "You think strength is in saying no, but you'll see, Margaret. Soon, everyone will see that you're not strong at all." I rose from my seat, pushing the chair back quietly. "Strength isn't about appearances, Vanessa. It's about what survives when the storm passes, and I promise you, I will survive." Their eyes followed me as I walked out of the dining room. I could feel the fury boiling beneath their composure, the way predators bristle when their prey refuses to cower. That dinner had not broken me, it had only shown them that I would not bend, and for that I knew they would strike harder. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a place where truth was supposed to shine, but often struggled beneath shadows. I sat at the long table, my scarf draped neatly across my shoulders, my back straight. Daniel sat across from me, his suit crisp, his expression unreadable. Vanessa was beside him, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a predator certain the trap was closing. Judge Morrison entered, gray-haired but sharp, his gavel striking once. "We are here to consider the petition for guardianship of Margaret Cole, filed by her son, Daniel Cole, and supported by medical documentation. Counsel, you may proceed." Vanessa's lawyer rose first, a polished man with a silver tie. He laid out their argument with confidence. "Your Honor, Mrs. Cole is 70 years old. Recent evidence suggests she suffers from lapses in memory and judgment. For her protection, her son seeks guardianship to manage her estate, valued at $55 million. He gestured toward the witness stand. A psychiatrist in a neat gray suit approached, carrying a file. His voice was steady as he spoke. "Based on my evaluation, I conclude that Mrs. Cole exhibits signs of short-term memory decline. She may forget critical details, such as financial deadlines or even basic safety." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. My pulse hammered, but I lifted my chin. I had never met this man. He was a phantom, conjured by Vanessa's money and influence. My lawyer, Robert Hayes, rose slowly. His presence was calm, but commanding. "Your Honor, before this testimony is accepted, I must note, my client has never been examined by this doctor. This so-called report is based on second-hand accounts, not direct observation. Furthermore, I have here complete financial records from the past 6 months." He lifted a thick folder and approached the bench. Every transaction, every bill, every investment handled personally by Mrs. Cole. Not a single error, not a single late payment. In fact, her accounts reflect precision most young professionals fail to achieve. The judge flipped through the pages. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the shuffle of paper. Daniel shifted in his chair, the first crack in his armor. Vanessa's smile tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed forward. Robert continued, his voice firmer now. "This is not a case of protection. This is a case of power. Mrs. Cole is of sound mind and capable judgment. The only thing she suffers from is a son and daughter-in-law who would strip her of dignity for their own gain." My hands clasped in my lap, I whispered a single word to myself. "Steady." The judge set down the file. His gaze swept the room. "These are serious allegations. Forged or exaggerated medical reports will not be tolerated. At this stage, I am not prepared to grant guardianship. The matter will remain under review until further evidence is presented." A collective breath filled the room. Vanessa's nails dug into her purse strap. Daniel's jaw flexed. Their victory had slipped through their fingers, at least for now. The gavel struck again. "Court is adjourned." As the room emptied, Vanessa leaned toward me, her voice low, venomous. "This isn't over. You won't last, Margaret. Everyone will see soon enough." I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. Love isn't giving someone control. Love is giving them responsibility, and responsibility is what you will never understand. Her lips pressed tight, fury flashing across her face. She turned away, but I knew my words had landed. I walked out of that courtroom, not triumphant, but unbroken. They had tried to bury me beneath lies and forged papers. Instead, I had stood, and the ground beneath me had held. The battle was not finished, but for the first time, I felt the tide shift. The knock on the cottage door was hard, impatient. Rain pounded on the roof, the storm outside no softer than the one I knew was waiting at my threshold. I pulled Henry's scarf tighter around my shoulders and opened the door. Daniel stood there, his face set in cold determination, and beside him was a stranger in a gray suit carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Daniel didn't wait for an invitation. He brushed past me into the living room, the advisor following smoothly, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. "Mother," Daniel said sharply, "this is Mr. Kane, a senior financial advisor. He's here to help you correct your mistakes. We don't have time to waste. You need to sign the documents now, before you lose everything." Mr. Kane smiled in a way that was meant to soothe, but to me it felt rehearsed, oily. He placed the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a crisp snap. Papers slid out, neat, intimidating. "Mrs. Cole," he said gently, his tone like honey over steel, "you've done well for your age, but large estates like yours are complex. Mistakes are common. At your stage of life, it's easy to miss details. Let us take this burden from you." I stayed standing, my eyes on the folder. My voice was calm but firm. "I haven't asked for help, and I won't sign away what Henry entrusted to me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mother, stop pretending. You don't understand these markets. I do. Vanessa does. You're clinging to what you can't manage." The air in the room thickened. My pulse hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "Clinging is what a drowning man does, Daniel. What I hold isn't desperation. It's principle." His face flushed. "If you loved me, you'd prove it by trusting me with this. Why do you keep fighting your own son?" Before I could answer, the door opened again. Robert Hayes stepped in, his briefcase under his arm, his presence commanding even in the quiet room. His eyes swept over Daniel and the advisor before settling on me. "Margaret," he said warmly, "I thought I might be needed here." Daniel bristled. "You don't belong here, Robert. This is a family matter." Robert's tone sharpened. "Then let's speak as family. Or do you want me to start with these?" He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. He laid them on the table right beside the advisor's contracts. "These are credit card statements, Daniel. Every charge tied to your father's account. Casino withdrawals, luxury purchases, late-night transfers to cover gambling debts. Do you want me to read them aloud?" Daniel's face drained of color. He reached for the papers, but Robert's hand came down firm. "Don't. These are copies. The originals are secured. You see, Margaret, your son has a long history of financial recklessness. He's not here to protect you. He's here to erase you so he can cover what he already squandered." The advisor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his polished composure cracking. "I wasn't aware of," he began, but Robert cut him off. "You weren't aware because you didn't care to ask, or perhaps because you profit from clients like Daniel. Either way, I suggest you leave before this becomes part of the record." The advisor's smile faltered. He gathered his papers quickly, stuffing them back into his briefcase. His voice dropped, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Cole, I'll step back. Clearly this is more complicated than presented." With that, he moved toward the door, eager to escape the storm inside. Daniel exploded. "You're turning everyone against me. You think standing with Robert makes you strong? You're my mother. You're supposed to be on my side." I met his rage with calm. "Being your mother doesn't mean surrendering my integrity. Henry trusted me for a reason. and I will not betray that trust. Not for you, not for anyone." Daniel's voice cracked, louder now, almost desperate. "You're against me, Mother. You're choosing strangers over your own son." I stood tall, my hands steady on the back of the chair. "No, Daniel. I'm choosing truth over lies, and until you understand the difference, you'll never stand on the side of family." The words landed heavier than any gavel. For a moment, Daniel looked small, cornered, furious, but powerless. He turned on his heel and stormed out into the rain, the door slamming behind him. Robert gathered the scattered papers and placed them back in his briefcase. His voice softened as he looked at me. "This was only one battle, Margaret. He'll strike again, but he showed his weakness today. Lies always leave a trail, and he's left more than one." I nodded, the fire in my chest no longer just defense, but resolve. Daniel thought fear would break me. Instead, his betrayal had carved steel into my spine. The storm outside howled against the windows, but inside the cottage I felt unshaken. They had underestimated me. Again. The storm had passed, but the air inside the cottage still felt heavy, as if the walls themselves held their breath. I wandered into the small study Henry once used, a place I had avoided since his death. Dust coated the wooden shelves, and the faint smell of cedar lingered. I pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk. Beneath a stack of old envelopes and yellowed receipts sat a small cedar box, worn smooth at the edges. My hands trembled as I lifted it onto the desk. The brass clasp clicked open with a sound that echoed louder than it should have. Inside lay Henry's leather-bound notebook. Its corners were frayed, the cover etched with the years he had carried it. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the indentations left by his steady hand. My breath caught as I opened to the first page. At first, the entries were practical, lists of stocks, dividend notes, cautious projections. It was Henry's way, patient, disciplined, never reckless. But deeper in, the handwriting changed, words heavier, sentences longer. One entry froze me. "Daniel insists again that we liquidate. He says dividends are too slow, that quick profits in real estate would be better. He called patience old-fashioned. I worry he does not see the value beyond numbers. He only sees what can be flipped fast." My eyes burned, but I turned the page. Another entry, dated 2 years before his heart gave out. "I always believed Daniel would carry this forward. I thought it would be his legacy. But today, I overheard him laughing with colleagues. He said, 'When it's mine, I'll sell the whole lot. Who waits decades for crumbs when you can double your money in months?' That was the moment I knew. He doesn't understand. These shares aren't crumbs. They are the years of patience, the proof of discipline, the story of our life. Amelia, no, Margaret, she sees this. She lives this. She must be the one to carry it." I sat back, my heart pounding, the journal heavy in my lap. My husband had heard the truth from Daniel's own lips. He had almost given it all to him. But that single careless sentence had revealed what lay beneath. Greed disguised as ambition. Henry had chosen me not because I was the only one left, but because I was the only one who understood. I whispered into the silence. "Henry, you knew." The weight of his trust pressed against my chest, but this time it didn't crush me. It steadied me. This wasn't just inheritance. It was conviction, proof written in his hand that my decision was not defiance, but fidelity. I traced the ink with my fingertips, the ridges where his pen had pressed deep. I felt as though his voice lingered in the room, speaking through the pages. I rose and carried the journal to the window. The lake shimmered beyond, ripples catching the late afternoon light. For weeks, Daniel and Vanessa had tried to paint me as unstable, confused, a relic clinging to relevance. But here, in my hands, was the truth that dismantled every whisper, every lie. When Robert arrived later that evening, I placed the journal on the table between us. His eyes scanned the entries, and he let out a low whistle. "This changes everything." Henry himself questioned Daniel's judgment. "He entrusted you because you embody what he built. If the court sees this, their case crumbles." I nodded, my voice calm. "Then we'll show them. Not because I need to win, but because Henry's truth deserves daylight. Robert closed the journal gently. You're stronger than they realize, Margaret. This isn't just defense anymore. This is offense. I smiled faintly, my resolve no longer fragile. The journal wasn't simply evidence, it was a shield and a sword. Daniel's hunger might still drive him, but now I held the story he could never rewrite. That night, I placed the journal on my bedside table, my hand resting on it, as though holding Henry's hand once more. The storm outside was gone, but inside me a different storm had taken root, not of fear, but of resolve. Daniel thought betrayal would break me. Vanessa thought whispers would silence me. But Henry's words reminded me I was never meant to yield. Sunday mornings at Hartford Church had once been a place of comfort for me, a rhythm of hymns and fellowship. But that morning, the warmth was gone. I walked through the heavy oak doors, Henry's scarf wrapped tightly around my shoulders. The organ played softly, but the notes felt hollow against the cool stares that greeted me. A few women I had known for decades shifted in their pews when I passed. One couple, who once shared potluck dinners with Henry and me, lowered their eyes and pretended to study their hymnals. Another turned her back entirely, whispering something to her husband. The sting was sharper than I expected. I forced myself to sit tall, but I felt the weight of their silence pressing down like stones. After the service, I approached Mrs. Taylor, an old neighbor. "Good morning, Grace," I said gently. Her smile was thin, strained. "Margaret," she replied, her eyes flicking away. Then she excused herself quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Whispers rippled behind me. Words like greedy, selfish, hoarding floated through the air, each one slicing deeper than any blade. I left the church in silence, my footsteps echoing against the stone walkway. The scarf brushed my cheek, Henry's familiar gift grounding me. Later that week, at the supermarket, the shadows followed me. As I reached for a carton of milk, I caught sight of two women at the end of the aisle, their heads bent close, voices sharp but not low enough. "It's such a shame," one said, shaking her head. "All that money, and she keeps it for herself. 55 million, and not a penny for her own son." The other sighed. "I heard she even forgot to pay her bills. Imagine letting someone like that control everything." My hand tightened on the carton until the plastic creaked. Heat rose in my chest, but I forced my face still. I placed the milk in my cart, lifted my chin, and walked past them. Their eyes followed, filled with pity, edged by contempt. At the checkout line, the cashier's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. I slid my card, half expecting it to be declined again after Daniel's last attempt. Relief spread when the screen flashed, "Approved," but the glances from the line behind me burned. When I reached the parking lot, I stopped beside my car. My hands clutched Henry's scarf, fingers digging into the wool. I whispered into the cold air, "Only actions can silence words. Not explanations, not arguments, only actions." I thought of Henry's journal, his faith in me. I thought of Robert and Ellen, standing firm when others wavered. And I thought of the community, now turning cold, poisoned by Vanessa's whispers. I opened the car door and sat for a long moment, the steering wheel cold beneath my palms. Faces I had known for decades had become strangers overnight. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about dignity, about not letting lies rewrite my life. That night, as I sat by the cottage window, the lake reflected the silver light of the moon. The journal lay open on my lap, Henry's words etched deep into my mind. He had trusted me because I understood that wealth was not for vanity, but for responsibility. The shadows in town would not vanish with words. They would vanish with proof, with deeds, with quiet strength. I wrapped the scarf tighter and whispered again, steady this time, "Let them talk. I will act." The storm Vanessa had unleashed was real, but storms pass, and when they do, only what is anchored survives. I was anchored, in Henry's trust, in my own resolve, in the truth they could not erase. The community's coldness hurt, but it also carved something harder into me. Resolve. If they wanted to see who I truly was, I would show them. Not through defense, but through endurance. Not by pleading, but by standing. As the night deepened, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing on all sides. But inside, something unshakable had taken root. Their whispers might shape the air for a time, but my actions would shape the ground they stood on, and I would not be moved. The cottage was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that carries both comfort and weight. I made coffee in the old percolator, the hiss and gurgle steadying me as I waited. When I stepped out to the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive, I expected the usual: bills, advertisements, notices from the bank. But among the envelopes was one different from the rest. It was handwritten, the paper slightly worn, my name spelled carefully in neat script. Mrs. Margaret Cole. I held it in my hand for a moment, feeling its unexpected weight. Back inside, I set it on the kitchen table, the morning light streaming across the wood. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the flap. Inside was a single sheet of lined stationery, folded with care. I unfolded it slowly, and as my eyes scanned the words, my breath caught. Mrs. Cole, we wanted you to know what your husband's emergency fund meant to us. Last winter, when our boat sank, we thought we had lost everything. The mortgage, the children's schooling, even our dignity. But because of the fund Mr. Henry Cole created, we were able to rebuild. We bought another boat, kept our home, and held our heads high. You may not know us well, but your husband saved not only our livelihood, but our pride. We thank you for continuing what he started. We believe in you. With gratitude, the Calder family. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. For weeks I had been walking through shadows, neighbors whispering, old friends turning away, my own son scheming to strip me of dignity. I had been called greedy, unstable, unfit. But here, in ink, was truth. Not rumor, not accusation. Truth. My hand pressed against the page as though I could touch their gratitude directly. The Calder family, people I had barely known, were standing in the wreckage of their own storm, and Henry's foresight had carried them through. His patience, his discipline, his quiet strength had saved them. I laughed softly through the tears, a sound almost foreign after weeks of silence and suspicion. For the first time in too long, I felt a smile rise, small but steady. I whispered into the stillness, "Henry, you were right. It was never just about us. It was about all the lives this legacy could touch." The scarf around my shoulders felt warmer than usual, as if Henry himself had draped it there again. I sat at the table, the letter spread before me, and let the tears flow freely. They weren't tears of despair this time. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of hope breaking through the darkness. Later that afternoon, Robert stopped by with more documents. When he saw the letter, he paused, his expression softening. "This," he said quietly, "is stronger than any legal argument. People may doubt numbers, but they don't doubt gratitude. It's living proof of what Henry left behind and what you're protecting." I nodded, my voice calm but firm. "Then we'll hold on to it, not just as evidence, but as a reminder. Every time they try to break me, I'll remember the Calders, and I'll remember that silence is not the same as weakness." He smiled faintly, closing his briefcase. "Margaret, you're not just enduring anymore, you're shining, and they won't know how to fight that." That night, I placed the Calder letter inside the cedar box with Henry's journal. Two pieces of truth side by side, his conviction and their gratitude. Together they formed a shield nothing Vanessa or Daniel could twist. As the moon rose over Candlewood Lake, I stood by the window, the scarf brushing against my cheek. The whispers in town still echoed, but they no longer felt as sharp. Their words were shadows, but shadows disappear when even the smallest light shines. And this letter was light, pure and undeniable. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt not only anchored but lifted. The storm wasn't over, but I was no longer walking through it alone. Somewhere out there, families like the Calders believed in me, and that belief was stronger than every lie my enemies spread. I folded my hands over the box and whispered into the night, "Let them speak. I will act, and the truth will carry me." The morning of Henry's memorial dawned clear, the lake behind Hartford Church shimmering in soft blue. Folding chairs stretched across the grass, their metal legs sinking slightly into the damp soil. The scent of pine drifted from the woods beyond, mingling with the faint sweetness of flowers placed carefully along the rows. At the front, beneath the wide branches of an old oak tree, stood a stone bench, newly carved. Its surface caught the sunlight, and the inscription was simple but powerful. Henry Cole, a steward of integrity. I stood near the front, Henry's scarf draped over my shoulders, my hands folded tightly in my lap. For weeks, I had felt the eyes of the community turn colder, their whispers echoing louder than hymns. Today was different. Today, the whispers would meet the truth. Robert adjusted his tie as he stepped forward to open the service. His voice carried across the crowd. Henry Cole lived not for titles, not for trophies, but for trust. His legacy was patience, discipline, and quiet strength. Today, we gather to remember that. I felt a swell of emotion as heads bowed, yet I knew the peace wouldn't last. Halfway through the program, movement at the back drew every gaze. Daniel and Vanessa walked down the center aisle, their steps purposeful, their faces tight. Vanessa's heels struck the ground like hammers. Daniel's jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on me. They hadn't come to honor Henry. They had come to seize the moment. When the microphone was offered for reflections, Vanessa reached it first. Her smile was thin, her voice smooth, but laced with venom. "We all know Henry was a man of discipline," she began, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "But what many of you may not realize is that his wife, my mother-in-law, has twisted his legacy into something self-serving. $55 million left in her hands, and look at the result. Isolation, division, a family broken." Gasps rippled through the audience. My fingers tightened on Henry's scarf, but I stayed silent, steady. Vanessa's tone sharpened. If Henry were here, would he truly want his life's work controlled by someone who clings to the past, too fragile to see the future? My husband and I believe his legacy deserves better stewardship. My mother-in-law does not deserve to carry this alone. The words struck hard, like knives thrown in public. A hush fell, the kind that cuts deeper than noise. And then, from the back row, a voice broke the silence. A man stood, broad shoulders, weathered hands, his face familiar from the letter I had received. It was Mr. Calder. His wife rose beside him, their children leaning forward, their expressions solemn. "Mrs. Cole deserves every bit of respect," Mr. Calder said firmly, his voice carrying like a bell. "Because without Henry's foresight, and without her protection of his legacy, my family would not be standing here today." The crowd stirred. All eyes turned as he continued. "When our boat sank last winter, we thought it was the end. We faced losing our home, pulling our children from school, starting over with nothing. But Henry had created a fund, an emergency lifeline for families like mine. And when the time came, Margaret ensured that help reached us. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look for recognition. She simply carried forward what Henry started." Mrs. Calder's voice joined his, steady and emotional. "Our children still have a roof over their heads because of them. Henry saved us, and Margaret honored that. Don't let anyone here tell you she is unworthy. She is the reason his legacy lives on." A murmur spread through the crowd, softer now, shifting. Heads turned toward me, not with suspicion, but with reconsideration. Vanessa's face paled, her lips tightening. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his fists clenching at his sides. Their control of the narrative cracked in real time, exposed under the weight of truth spoken plainly. Robert stepped back to the podium. "There are many ways to measure wealth," he said quietly. "But perhaps the greatest is in the lives touched, the dignity preserved. Today, we see that Henry's legacy was never numbers. It was people, and Margaret has protected that. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't suspicion now. It was reflection. One by one, I saw people nodding, some lowering their eyes in shame, others looking at me with something closer to respect. I rose slowly, every eye following. I placed my hand on Henry's stone bench, tracing the carved words with my fingertips. My voice, though quiet, carried across the rows. Henry believed wealth was not a trophy. It was a responsibility. I will not apologize for honoring that, not to anyone. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if on cue, several members of the congregation nodded, their expressions softened, the tide turning right there on the grass. Daniel's voice broke the quiet, sharp with frustration. "This isn't over," he snapped, but his words fell flat. No one responded. No one supported him. The weight of the Calder family's testimony hung heavy, silencing doubt more effectively than any argument I could have made. As the service closed, people approached me, not with whispers now, but with steady handshakes, gentle words, and quiet apologies. The shadow that had followed me began to lift. That evening, as the sun set over Candlewood Lake, I sat by the cottage window with Henry's scarf wrapped tight. The memory of the Calders standing tall replayed in my mind. For the first time in months, I felt the community's respect returning, not because I had begged for it, but because the truth had spoken for itself. And I knew then, the tide was turning. Daniel's face burned red, the veins at his temples pulsing, his chest heaving as though the air itself betrayed him. The murmurs of the crowd after the Calder family's testimony still lingered, but all attention now returned to him. His voice sliced through the silence, sharp, angry, and unsteady. "You chose them!" he shouted, his arms sweeping toward the crowd. "You chose strangers, neighbors, outsiders, but not me, never me!" His jaw quivered, eyes blazing with rage and hurt. "You chose to humiliate your own son in front of everyone." I felt the scarf around my shoulders, the same gray wool Henry had once wrapped around me on a cold anniversary morning. My fingers tightened on it now, steadying me, grounding me. I took a slow breath and lifted my chin, meeting Daniel's eyes without flinching. "No, Daniel," I said, my voice cutting through the air, clear and resolute. "I didn't choose them over you. You chose to walk away from me. You chose greed. You chose cruelty. You chose to treat me not as your mother, but as an obstacle." The words landed heavy, each syllable like a gavel striking. The entire crowd froze, caught in the gravity of the moment. Even the wind off Candlewood Lake seemed to pause, the branches of the oak above us swaying in eerie stillness. Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came. His fists clenched tight at his sides, knuckles white, as though the only thing keeping him upright was fury itself. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for support, for even a flicker of sympathy. None came. The townsfolk who once whispered against me now stood silent, their expressions unreadable but unwavering. They had seen the truth. They had heard the Calder family. They had watched Daniel twist, manipulate, and betray. And now, there was no veil left to hide behind. Vanessa stepped closer to him, her hand brushing his sleeve, her voice a hiss meant only for his ears, but sharp enough for those nearby to catch. "Stop this, Daniel. They see you. All of them. You're making it worse." But Daniel yanked his arm away, his glare snapping to her. "You told me this would work," he spat. "You told me she'd fold, that everyone would believe us. Look at her now." He jabbed a finger toward me, his voice breaking, not with sorrow but with panic. I held his gaze, steady, unshaken. "This isn't about winning or losing, Daniel. It's about who we are when no one's looking. Your father believed in responsibility, in dignity, in patience. I stood by his side for 40 years and watched him live by those values. And you turned your back on all of it." Daniel's chest rose and fell, his breath ragged. His anger twisted into something almost fragile, an exposed wound beneath the armor. But instead of softening, He hardened again, lashing out to shield himself. "You think you're better than me?" he sneered. "You sit there, wrapped in his scarf, pretending you're the only one who mattered to him. But I'm his son. His name runs in my blood, not yours. And one day, people will see that this empire belongs to me, no matter what lies you feed them." I let the silence answer first, the weight of his words hanging in the air like smoke. Then I spoke, calm but unyielding. "Blood is not enough, Daniel. Legacy is not about entitlement. It is about how you carry it, how you honor it. And you've shown everyone here exactly what you would do with it. Destroy it for your own pride." Gasps rose from the crowd. A woman in the front row shook her head, whispering to her neighbor. A man folded his arms, his eyes narrowing at Daniel. Every second he spoke, he buried himself deeper in their judgment. Daniel's breathing quickened, his fury boiling into desperation. His hand slammed against the podium with a crack that echoed through the churchyard. "I am not the villain," he roared. "You've turned them against me. You've poisoned them with your lies." My voice rose, not in volume, but in strength, sharp and certain. "No, Daniel. You turned yourself into this, and now the world sees it. This was never about me against you. It was you against your own conscience." The words hung in the air, reverberating through the silence that followed. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the children in the back row were still, their wide eyes fixed on the man unraveling before them. For a long moment, Daniel stood trembling, caught between defiance and collapse, his eyes locked on mine, searching for a softness that wasn't there. At last, his shoulders dropped, not in surrender, but in defeat, wrapped in rage. He spat the words like venom. "You'll regret this." With that, he turned on his heel. His footsteps pounded across the grass, harsh and final. Vanessa hesitated for half a beat, her eyes flicking between him and the crowd, her mask of composure cracking. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, she hurried after him, her heels sinking into the soil as she chased her husband down the path. The sound of their retreat faded into the distance. The crowd remained frozen, the silence now heavy with the residue of what had just unfolded. Slowly, one by one, people turned back toward me. Their eyes carried no doubt now, only clarity. I drew the scarf tighter around my shoulders, its familiar weight a reminder of Henry's quiet strength. I lifted my head and met the eyes of my neighbors, my friends, even those who once doubted me. And though my heart ached with the wound of Daniel's words, my spine remained straight, my voice steady. "He walked away," I said softly, but the words carried. "Not me. He chose this path, and I will choose mine." The oak leaves rustled overhead, as though the world itself acknowledged the truth. For the first time in months, the silence felt like victory, not a triumph of power, but of dignity. And as I stood there, Henry's scarf warming me against the chill, I knew the battle wasn't fully over. But the tide had shifted. Daniel's mask had shattered before everyone, and there would be no repairing it. The confrontation had ended not with signatures or threats, but with the raw, undeniable truth of choice. He chose pride. I chose integrity. And the world had finally seen the difference. The echo of Daniel's retreat still lingered when the crowd shifted. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I felt it, the quiet gravity of dozens of eyes, not sharp with judgment anymore, but softened with recognition. They moved toward me, not in a rush, not with fanfare, but with the deliberate steps of people who had made up their minds. I stood still, Henry's scarf heavy across my shoulders, the fabric damp with the mist rolling off Candlewood Lake. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the strange weight of being seen after so many weeks of whispers and suspicion. Ellen reached me first. Her hand, warm and steady, clasped mine with a strength that steadied me more than words ever could. Her voice carried the certainty of someone who had weathered storms of her own. "Henry was right," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "Only you could keep this legacy safe." Her words landed like an anchor, holding me firm. For months I had carried the doubt, the cruel rumors, the smear campaigns, And now, in the space of a few words, Ellen cut through all of it. Victor stepped beside her, his frame broad, his presence steady as the stone bench engraved with Henry's name. He didn't offer comfort the way Ellen did. He offered truth. His voice was deep, resolute. "People can turn their backs," he said, his gaze sweeping across the gathering. "But the truth never will." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Neighbors who once avoided me at the market now shifted closer. Mrs. Cooper, who had whispered by the checkout line, met my eyes and gave the smallest nod. Mr. Reyes, who had crossed the street to avoid me weeks ago, raised his hand in a quiet gesture of respect. No apologies were spoken, but none were needed. Their faces said enough. The weight of their suspicion was gone, replaced by something quieter, sturdier, acknowledgement. I breathed in the damp air, letting the moment sink into me. For the first time since Henry's passing, I didn't feel like a woman on trial. I felt like a woman standing in the light of truth, seen clearly for who I was. Ellen's grip tightened, grounding me. "You carried this when no one else believed. You held steady when even your own son turned against you. That isn't weakness, Margaret. That's strength." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. For weeks, I had been accused of clinging, of hoarding, of being stubborn to the point of cruelty. And yet here, in Ellen's words, stubbornness became steadiness. Resistance became resilience. Victor added, his tone blunt but kind. "Henry didn't leave this to you by accident. He saw Daniel clearly. He saw what could happen. And he trusted you with all of it. That's not a burden. That's a charge." The crowd shifted again, their silence not empty but full of understanding, of quiet respect. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions too soft to hear. The older men and women nodded, their gazes steady on me. The lies that had once poisoned the air had no root left to cling to. I drew the scarf tighter around me, its wool scratchy but warm. My voice came steady, carrying not just to Ellen and Victor, but to everyone gathered. I never wanted a battle. I wanted only to keep faith, with Henry, with what we built together, with the meaning behind every dollar he earned. Money isn't power. Money is trust. And I will not betray that trust. The words carried across the lawn, and in the stillness that followed, I knew they had settled into the hearts of those who listened. A man I barely knew, a fisherman from across town, raised his voice hesitantly. "Your husband helped my cousin once. He never asked for thanks. We see that same spirit in you now." His words cracked slightly, but they carried truth. Others nodded, small gestures, but each one a brick laid on the foundation Henry and I had spent a lifetime building. Ellen leaned closer. Her whisper meant only for me, but sharp with conviction. "They will remember this day, Margaret. Not Daniel's fury, not Vanessa's whispers, but your steadiness. They'll carry that memory longer than any rumor." I felt the truth of it settle deep inside me. For so long, I had thought silence was my shield. But today proved something greater. Silence, paired with truth, becomes a mirror. And when the world finally looks into it, lies have no place to hide. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and lake water. The oak leaves rustled above, almost like applause from the world itself. The community didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They didn't need to. Their presence, their eyes, their quiet acknowledgement were more powerful than any ovation. Victor stepped forward one last time, his voice even but firm. "You're not alone anymore, Margaret. Not in this fight. Not in what comes next. Whatever Daniel and Vanessa try, the truth has already spoken. And it spoke for you." I closed my eyes briefly, the weight of the moment pressing into me. When I opened them again, I looked out over the faces, friends, neighbors, strangers turned witnesses. I didn't see pity. I didn't see suspicion. I saw recognition. And in that recognition, I found something I hadn't dared hope for in months. Not victory. Not vindication. Something quieter. Stronger. Belonging. I stood straighter, my hand resting lightly on Henry's scarf, and let the silence carry me. The storm had raged long enough, At last, truth was the only sound left. The sun dipped low over Candlewood Lake, painting the water in shades of amber and crimson. I sat on the porch of the cottage, the wooden boards warm beneath me, Henry's scarf across my shoulders. In one hand I held his journal, in the other the letter from the Calders. Two voices of truth, one from the man who built the legacy, the other from those who had been saved by it. Both reminded me why I had endured every storm. The air was still, broken only by the soft lapping of waves against the shore. For the first time in months, the silence felt like peace, not isolation. I breathed it in, steady, letting it settle deep into my bones. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path. I looked up to see a boy no older than 10 running toward me. His hair stuck up in wild tufts, his clothes plain but neat, his eyes bright with a mix of nerves and excitement. He slowed as he reached the porch, clutching a small envelope in his hand. "Mrs. Cole?" he asked, his voice careful. I nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes." He held out the envelope. "My mom said to give you this. I got the scholarship, the Henry Cole Scholarship. Thank you." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened as I took the envelope, my hands trembling. "What's your name?" I asked softly. "Ethan," he said, his smile shy. "But at school they already call me the boy who got Grandma Cole's gift." Tears stung my eyes, but I let the smile grow. "Is that so?" He nodded eagerly. "I want to study science. Someday I want to build boats that never sink, so families like the Calders don't lose everything." I laughed, the sound breaking free, pure and unguarded. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you honor Henry more than you know, Ethan, because he believed wealth meant nothing unless it carried others forward." The boy's face lit with pride, and he whispered, "Thank you, Grandma Cole." The words landed deeper than he could imagine. Not an insult, not a whisper of doubt, but a title of respect. A child, untouched by rumors, calling me not greedy, not unfit, but Grandma. It was the name that carried dignity. As Ethan ran back down the path, his laughter trailing behind him, I turned back to the lake. The journal lay open on my lap, Henry's handwriting steady across the page. "Responsibility is love in action." I whispered into the fading light, my voice steady but tender. "Legacy is not meant to be fought over. It is not a prize, it is a promise. And I will keep that promise, for Henry, for the Calders, for Ethan, and for every child who dreams of more." The horizon burned brighter as the sun slipped lower, the colors deepening into gold and violet. The air cooled, but I felt only warmth, the warmth of fulfillment, of truth, of carrying a burden that had become a blessing. Behind me, the cottage stood strong, its cedar walls glowing in the sunset. Before me, the lake stretched wide, endless, reflecting the light that remained. And within me, there was no anger left, only peace. Fade out. Soft music swells. The scarf brushes against my cheek as the last light of day settles into night.